Every single night, you fail at something you didn't even know you were trying to do. You lie down, you close your eyes, and you tell your focus to shut off. Just stop. Go quiet. And it refuses. Instead, it does something almost cruel. It reaches 5 years into the past and replays, in perfect detail, the exact moment you said something embarrassing to a stranger at a party. Not last week's problem, not tomorrow's deadline. That one specific memory, uninvited, at full volume, right when you have the least ability to do anything about it. And here's the part that should bother you more than it does. You didn't choose that memory. You didn't go looking for it. Something inside your skull pulled it off a shelf and pointed your attention directly at it, with a force you could not overpower. Now think about what that actually means. All day long you assume you are the one steering your focus. You decide what to look at, what to listen to, what matters enough to think about. But the second the lights go off, that sense of control evaporates, and something else takes the wheel. So the question isn't why can't you sleep? The real question, the one nobody asks, is this. If you're not the one directing your attention at night, who is? That question is the whole reason this video exists. Here's what almost everyone gets backwards. We treat focus like a light switch. On during the day, off at night. And if it won't switch off, something's broken. But that's not what's happening in your skull. Your attention isn't switching off, it's switching targets. During the day, it's pointed outward, at your boss's email, at the road in front of your car, at the conversation you're having right now. At night, that same spotlight doesn't die. It just spins around 180 degrees and points inward, and it gets to work on something you can't consciously supervise. Picture your attention as a single bouncer standing at the door of a nightclub. All day, that bouncer's entire job is managing who gets in from outside. Sounds, sights, emails, conversations, all of it lining up at the door, and the bouncer is deciding what's worth letting through and what gets ignored. That's your daytime focus. It's an outward-facing gatekeeper. But the moment you fall asleep, that bouncer locks the front door. No more new arrivals from the outside world. And here's the part nobody expects. Locking the door doesn't mean the club goes quiet. It means everyone who's already inside, every memory, every unresolved thought, every stray emotional loose end from your day, suddenly has the floor. The music doesn't stop, it gets louder, because there's no longer any competition from outside. That's why your mind feels loudest exactly when the room goes silent. It's not malfunctioning, it's finally being heard. And that reallocation has a name. Neuroscientists call it the shift from your central executive network, the part of your brain built for outward, goal-directed focus, to your default mode network, which handles something much stranger, sorting, filing, and rebuilding your internal world while you're not watching. Somewhere backstage, a mailroom clerk who's been buried under a chaotic pile of sticky notes all day finally gets the lights turned on and starts filing everything into permanent cabinets. That's your hippocampus, replaying today's events and deciding what gets promoted to long-term memory and what gets thrown in the trash. You're not losing focus at night. Your focus just clocked into a different job, and once you see it that way, something clicks into place that changes how you'll think about every restless night for the rest of your life. Distraction, dreaming, that 2 a.m. spiral, none of it is your focus failing. It's your focus working overtime on a task you were never meant to consciously watch. The stage crew isn't sabotaging the show. They're the reason there's a show to put on tomorrow. So if your brain has a mandatory night shift, the real question becomes, what happens when you interrupt it? And how do you actually work with it instead of against it? That's exactly where we're going. Right, so let's actually open up the hood on this thing, because your focus switches jobs at night is a nice way to put it, but it's not an explanation yet. It's a claim. And I want you to actually understand the machinery behind it, because once you do, you'll never look at a sleepless night the same way again. Here's the first thing you need to know. Your brain doesn't have one attention system. It has two, and they are almost never both fully active at the same time. Think of them as two department heads who share one office and hate sharing it. The first one is called the Central Executive Network, and its entire job is you, interacting with the outside world. Reading this sentence, driving your car, catching a ball, arguing with your sibling about whose turn it is to do the dishes. Anything that requires you to take in information from out there and respond to it, that's the central executive network doing its job. It's outward facing. It's goal directed. It's the department head who's always on a conference call with the external world. The second one is called the default mode network, and it does something almost the opposite. It's not looking outward at all. It's looking inward, at your memories, your emotions, your sense of who you are, your worries about tomorrow, that conversation from 3 years ago you still haven't fully let go of. When you're daydreaming, when you're replaying an argument in the shower, when you're lying in bed running through your entire life story for no productive reason whatsoever, that's the default mode network taking the wheel. Now here's the toggle switch part, the part that actually matters. These two networks operate like a seesaw. When one goes up, the other comes down. They are, for the most part, mutually exclusive. You cannot be fully absorbed in reading a difficult paragraph and fully absorbed in reminiscing about your childhood at the exact same moment. One of them has to yield the floor. During your waking hours, the central executive network wins that fight most of the time because, well, you have a life to run, emails to answer, traffic to not crash into. But it never wins completely. That's why your mind still wanders during a boring meeting. The default mode network is constantly knocking on the door, waiting for its turn. And then night falls, and the entire balance of power flips. This is where it gets interesting, because the flip doesn't happen because your brain suddenly loses the ability to focus outward. It happens because your brain makes a decision, and it's not a decision you're consciously part of. It starts systematically shutting the external gates. I want you to picture this literally, because the picture matters. Deep in the middle of your brain sits a structure called the thalamus, and one of its jobs is acting like a nightclub bouncer standing at the door between your senses and your conscious awareness. All day, information is lining up outside that door. Sounds, sights, the feeling of your shirt against your skin, the hum of the refrigerator. The bouncer's job is to decide what's worth letting through to the VIP room of your conscious attention, and what gets left standing outside, ignored. This is happening every single second you're awake, and you don't even notice the bouncer working, because the bouncer is good at his job. But as you drift towards sleep, that bouncer starts closing the door. Not because there's nothing left outside. The fridge is still humming, your shirt is still touching your skin. But your brain deliberately dials down how much of that gets through. Sound gets dampened, light sensitivity drops. The stream of sensory information that's been flooding in all day starts to trickle, then nearly stops entirely. This is your brain clearing the stage. It's not that the outside world disappeared. It's that your brain stopped answering the door. And this is exactly where most people get confused about what's happening to them, because here's the part nobody warns you about. You'd think that shutting the external gates would make everything quiet, peaceful even. Less input, less noise, right? Wrong. This is where you run straight into what I like to call the attentional vacuum, and it's the reason your quietest hour is somehow the loudest hour in your head. Here's the mechanism, and it's simpler than you'd expect. Your attention system doesn't have a volume knob that just turns down when there's less to listen to. It has something closer to an automatic gain control, the same kind of technology you'd find in a microphone. You've probably noticed this if you've ever recorded audio in a quiet room. Turn up the gain, and even in dead silence you start picking up sound. The hum of the room, your own breathing. A faint hiss that was always technically there, but never loud enough to register when there was other noise competing for space. Your brain does something remarkably similar. When the external world's volume gets turned down at night, your attention doesn't shrink to match it. Instead, it turns its gain up, searching for something, anything, to focus on. And what does it find when the outside world has gone quiet? It finds you. Every unresolved thought sitting quietly in the back of your mind all day, waiting its turn, that was previously drowned out by traffic noise and conversations and screens, suddenly gets amplified into something that feels enormous. That embarrassing thing you said 5 years ago wasn't actually louder at 11 p.m. than it was at 2 p.m. It was always there. It just finally had the floor to itself. So when you feel like your thoughts are screaming at 2 a.m., understand what's actually happening. That's not anxiety manufacturing noise from nothing. That's your attention system doing exactly what it's built to do, hunting for signal in an unusually quiet room, and finding the only signal left, which is the contents of your own mind. Now, here's where the story shifts from something that might feel a little unsettling to something that should genuinely impress you, because all of this quieting and amplifying isn't pointless static. It's setting the stage for one of the most important jobs your brain does all day, and it happens in a part of your brain called the hippocampus. Think of the hippocampus as a mailroom clerk who has been buried alive all day. Every single thing that happened to you, every conversation, every fact you learned, every small emotional spike, got scribbled down on a sticky note and thrown onto this clerk's desk the moment it happened. By the end of the day, that desk looks like chaos. Hundreds of sticky notes, no order, no filing system, just a pile. During the day, the clerk doesn't get a moment to sort any of it, because he's too busy catching new notes as they fly in. But at night, once the external gates close and the incoming mail stops arriving, the clerk finally gets to work. And here's the part that sounds almost like science fiction but is completely real. The hippocampus starts replaying the events of your day at incredibly high speed, compressed sequences firing over and over, dramatically faster than the actual experience took. Scientists have literally recorded this happening in the brains of animals, watching the exact same neural firing patterns from a maze run during the day play back at many times the speed while the animal sleeps. What's actually happening during that high-speed replay is a kind of sorting operation. The hippocampus is essentially asking, note by note, does this matter enough to keep permanently? And the notes that pass that test don't just stay in the messy pile. They get physically transferred to a different filing system entirely, out of the hippocampus's temporary storage and into your cortex, which functions like a permanent filing cabinet built to last for years, sometimes for your entire life. This is why a full night of sleep after learning something new dramatically improves how well you remember it days later. It's not that time passing helps you remember, it's that the mailroom clerk needed the quiet to actually do the filing. But sorting the good stuff isn't the whole job. There's a second, quieter process happening at the exact same time, and it's just as important, maybe more important, even though it gets far less attention. It's called neural pruning, and it works less like filing and more like trash removal. Here's the thing about your brain that surprises most people. Every single day, as you think and learn and react to things, your neurons form new connections between each other. Thousands of them. Most of these connections are weak, hastily made, low quality. Think of them as the equivalent of scribbling a phone number on a napkin because you didn't have real paper handy, versus the important stuff that gets written carefully into a permanent notebook. If your brain kept every single connection it ever formed, your neural architecture would eventually become an impossibly cluttered mess, a warehouse so overstuffed with junk that finding anything useful would become physically difficult. So while you sleep, your brain runs a very literal cleaning crew. Specific support cells in your brain, including ones called microglia, physically go around and prune away the weak, low-quality connections that didn't prove useful during the day. This isn't a metaphor. This is your brain physically dismantling unnecessary wiring at a structural level, clearing space specifically so that tomorrow's important connections have room to form clearly, without competing against a backlog of yesterday's noise. And when you put these two processes together, the mailroom sorting and the trash pruning, you start to see something remarkable. Your brain isn't idling at night. It's not simply off. It is running one of the most sophisticated maintenance operations your body performs, deciding what deserves to become permanent memory, and physically demolishing what doesn't. And it can only do this work because the external gates are shut, and your attention has nowhere else to go but inward. Which means every strange, uncomfortable, seemingly pointless thing that happens in your head at night, the amplified thoughts, the resurfaced memories, the sense that your mind won't stop working even though your body desperately wants rest, All of it is evidence that the system is functioning exactly as designed. Your focus isn't broken at 2 a.m. It's in the middle of the most important job it does all day. But there's a cost to interrupting this process. And there's a reason your performance the next morning depends entirely on how well this nightly cleanup was allowed to run uninterrupted. So far, everything I've described has been happening in the quieter stages of sleep. The mailroom sorting, the pruning crew clearing out weak connections. But there's another stage of the night that operates completely differently. And it's so strange that if you described it to someone who'd never experienced it, they'd assume you were describing a malfunction. It's called REM sleep, and during it, your brain becomes almost as electrically active as it is when you're wide awake and solving a hard problem. Except you're not solving a problem. You're dreaming, and dreaming turns out to be one of the most intensely focused things your brain ever does. Here's what surprises most people about REM sleep. We tend to think of dreaming as a kind of mental static, random images firing off with no real purpose, a byproduct of a brain that's spinning while nobody's driving. But when researchers actually measure what's happening during REM, they don't find randomness. They find focus. Specifically, they find enormous activity in the amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for detecting threats and processing fear, along with intense activity in the emotional and sensory regions that construct the vivid, immersive quality of a dream. Your brain, during REM, is running something close to a threat simulation engine, constructing scenario after scenario, often emotionally charged ones, and forcing your attention to lock onto them with total commitment. Think about the dreams you actually remember. They're rarely boring. You're being chased. You're late for something important and can't move fast enough. You're facing someone you had unresolved conflict with. That's not a coincidence. Many researchers believe REM sleep functions as a kind of emotional rehearsal space, letting your brain process difficult experiences and rehearse responses to threats in a simulated environment where nothing you do has real consequences. Its focus turned entirely inward, running high-stakes simulations with the seriousness of real life, minus the actual risk. But here's where it gets genuinely strange, and this is the detail that changes how you think about dreaming forever. During REM sleep, one specific part of your brain goes almost completely dark. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for logic, judgment, and the ability to question whether something makes sense, drops dramatically in activity. This is the part of you that, while awake, would immediately notice if you started flying, or if a deceased relative walked into the room, or if the layout of your childhood home suddenly connected to your workplace. It's your internal editor, the one whose entire job is checking your experience against reality and flagging what doesn't add up. And during REM, that editor clocks out. This is why dreams get away with things that would be absurd in waking life. You're intensely, completely focused on the events of the dream, focused in a way that feels every bit as real as anything you experience awake. But there's no one checking the plot for consistency. You can be terrified, chased, cornered, and never once stop to think, wait, this doesn't make sense. The focus is genuine. The editor simply isn't there to interrupt it. It's the closest your waking mind will ever come to experiencing total, unquestioned absorption in something. And it happens specifically because the one system built to talk you out of it has gone offline. Now here's why all of this matters beyond simply being a fascinating fact about your own skull. Every piece of this nightly process, the gate closing, the mailroom sorting, the neural pruning, the REM simulations, is part of one continuous operation, and that operation has a very specific relationship with time. It needs enough of it, uninterrupted, to actually finish the job. And when it doesn't get that time, the consequences aren't vague or abstract. They show up the next day, in very specific and measurable ways. Picture that mailroom clerk again, except now imagine someone keeps flicking the lights on and off every 20 minutes throughout the night. Every time the lights come back on, external mail starts flooding back in, and the clerk has to stop mid-sort and deal with new arrivals instead of finishing the filing job from before. That's essentially what happens when your sleep gets fragmented, whether by stress, noise, alcohol, or simply cutting the night short. The sorting process gets interrupted before completion, Some of yesterday's sticky notes never make it to the permanent filing cabinet. Some of the weak, useless neural connections that were supposed to get pruned away survive the night, uncleared, cluttering up the workspace your brain needs clean for tomorrow. The result is something you've almost certainly felt without knowing exactly what caused it. That thick, foggy sensation where your thoughts feel slower, where you read the same sentence 3 times and still can't hold on to it, where you find yourself standing in a room and forgetting why you walked in. That's not simply tiredness in some vague sense. That's your central executive network, the part of you responsible for outward-facing focus, trying to operate the next day with a workspace that never got cleared. It's attempting to run today's tasks on top of yesterday's unfiled mess, and the interference shows up as exactly what we call brain fog. Not a mysterious ailment, a direct physical consequence of an incomplete overnight process. This is the piece that explains something a lot of people experience but rarely connect to its real cause. The days where your attention feels genuinely fragmented, where you can't seem to hold focus on a single task for more than a few minutes, before your mind slides off towards something else entirely, those days correlate directly with how well the previous night's internal cleanup was allowed to run. Your daytime focus isn't a standalone skill you either have or don't have on a given morning. It's an echo of what happened the night before. If the mailroom finished its sorting, and the pruning crew finished clearing weak connections, you wake up with a clean workspace, and your central executive network can operate with real precision. If that process got cut short, you're handed a cluttered desk and asked to do careful work on top of it anyway. This is also why chronic sleep disruption doesn't just make you feel tired, it actually degrades the quality of your attention over time in a way that compounds. Each incomplete night leaves a little more unsorted material behind. Miss enough nights in a row, and you're not managing a single day of fog, you're managing a slow accumulation of unfiled memories and unpruned clutter that never gets the chance to catch up, because every subsequent night is just as rushed as the one before it. So if your ability to focus tomorrow depends this directly on what your brain gets to finish tonight, the obvious next question is what you're actually supposed to do about it. And the honest answer isn't complicated, but it does require you to work with this system instead of fighting it, because a lot of what people do at night actively works against exactly the process we've just walked through. Remember the attentional vacuum from earlier, the reason your thoughts feel loudest right when the room goes quiet. That vacuum is not a flaw to be eliminated. It's a predictable feature of how your attention system behaves once the external gates close. Fighting it, lying there frustrated, demanding your mind go quiet, only feeds it more material to amplify, because now you're anxious about being anxious, and that becomes the loudest note in the room. The better approach is to give your default mode network something to sort through before you ever turn off the lights, rather than leaving it to discover the day's mess for the first time while you're trying to fall asleep. This is where something as simple as a brain dump earns its place. Spending even 5 minutes before bed writing down whatever's on your mind, unfinished tasks, unresolved worries, things you don't want to forget, gives your hippocampus a head start on the mailroom job. You're essentially handing the clerk a pre-sorted stack instead of a pile that's still mid-air. It won't eliminate the nighttime replay entirely, and it shouldn't. That replay is doing real work, but it takes the edge off the version of it that feels like ambush rather than process. The second piece is respecting the gate-closing mechanism itself instead of overriding it. Bright light late in the evening, particularly the blue heavy light coming off most screens, directly interferes with your brain's signal to start dampening sensory input. You're essentially telling the bouncer to keep the door wide open right as he's trying to close it for the night. Dimming lights an hour or so before bed, and giving your eyes a break from screens, isn't some wellness cliché. It's letting the thalamus do the exact job we described earlier, gradually turning down the volume on the outside world, so your brain can transition into internal processing without a fight. And the last piece is simply changing how you interpret what happens once the lights are off and your mind starts running. When a memory resurfaces, when your thoughts turn inward and start reviewing the day, that's not insomnia announcing itself. That's the system working exactly as designed. the mailroom clerk starting his shift, the pruning crew picking up their tools. Understanding that changes your relationship with it entirely. Instead of treating a racing mind at night as evidence that something's wrong with you, you can recognize it as evidence that something extraordinarily precise is happening on schedule, whether you consciously participate or not. Because that's really the whole story here. Your focus was never turned off at any point tonight. It changed jobs, from managing the world outside you to rebuilding the world inside you, and it's been working this entire time, whether you noticed or not.